Hello, welcome to Toronto Bible Study. I'm your host, Mike Sampat, and today I wanted to talk about why Christians should use the King James Bible and not other Bibles. And I don't know, I thought I was like, this is so hard to talk about this thing, so I'm sorry, this video is gonna be mostly just talking because I don't even know how I can explain this stuff. It's so complicated and there's so many different things, okay? Now, I'm going to put some resources in the description where you can look up stuff. But I'm just going to like talk about this stuff, okay? So, let's go. First thing I wanted to show you was a website about I don't know what it's about exactly. It's something about like how we got our Bible. Okay. So it's Christianity Today. So this is their little article, How We Got Our Bible. So I want to show you the timeline, okay? So yeah, 1400 to 400 BC, the books of the Hebrew Old Testaments are written. And then this thing is saying that between 250 and 200 BC, the Septuagint, a popular Greek translation of the Old Testament, is produced. Now, this is widely believed among scholars, but there's no really strong evidence that it was certainly made before the New Testament, and it's probably true that actually I tend to think, and this kind of like, see, because I'm part of this new King James only idea, right? So my view of these things is considered to be outside of the mainstream, right? So the mainstream view is that, yeah, the Septuagint was created in that period, and then so what we see is in the New Testament is that there are many places where the New Testament Greek, in quoting the Old Testament, seems to follow the Septuagint rather than the Hebrew. Okay, there's like slight differences that if you examine them carefully, then you'd say, oh, well, this is more closely with the Septuagint than with the Hebrew. A good example is Psalm 8, um, where he talks about he says something like, what is man to you, God? Something like that, or what is man? Something like that. Why have you raised him above the angels, a little bit above the angels, crowned him with glory and honor. Um, so that seems to follow the Greek Bible more than the Hebrew. So people say that, oh, it's because the New Testament authors used the Septuagint and that's what they knew, and so that's why that it follows that. Now, is that true? It's not entirely clear that the Septuagint is older than the New Testament. That's not something that they can prove in any way, and there's good reason to believe. There's no very good evidence either. Like there's no one, for example, talking about the Septuagint in the Old Testament period, except for like a few, like one or two things, one or two documents, and they're talking about. See, there's this legend that one of Alexander's generals, this guy Ptolemy, he was after Alexander died, the his empire split up into four regions, and one region was like the Egypt region, and that was where Ptolemy was, okay, and he ruled Israel and stuff too. So they say that Ptolemy was the one who commissioned the Septuagint, and there's a legend about it. Like he got 72 rabbis to come out there, and they translated it. And there's a whole bunch of legends about it, okay? And so it's very legendary, the whole story. So most people would think that that story is not true. But that story is the only thing that predates the New Testament. Written accounts of that story are the only thing that predate the New Testament in terms of evidence that the Septuagint predates the New Testament. So it's that legendary story. Historians don't believe that story, right? But and those documents that actually that tell about that story, they're the only evidence that there was a Septuagint before the New Testament. So, but even though historians don't believe that story, they still use those documents as the proof that the Septuagint predates the New Testament. So, if you understand what I just said, I hope you do, then you can see how they're very illogical, you know? They don't use their own standards. They at the same time as they say they reject that story as being legendary, they also still use the like documents that describe that story as proof that the Septuagint predates the New Testament. So it's very strange. It's very self-contradictory. Their use of evidence. And so that's just the first example of their contradictory use of evidence. But you'll see more as we go on and talk about the other things. But anyway, okay, yeah, 45 to 85 maybe, or maybe some people say later, but the uh the New Testament is written. Okay? Then 90 to 118, these councils supposedly fix the canon of the Old Testament. Then this guy came out with his heretical Marcion. He came out with his heretical New Testament. So that and because this guy Marcion, he's very much against, like, he's very kind of anti-Semitic, I guess you would say, and he's against the Old Testament ways of thinking. He used to actually think that we should just remove the Old Testament, or that that's a different God, that kind of Gnostic belief. So, but his work, his New Testament that he created, that caused other people to say, wait, we need to establish a proper New Testament canon. Um, so that's when they started building that up. Then by 305, you have Lucian of Antioch. He creates the Greek New Testament, the kind of one of the first, I guess. Ah, yes. And then in 367, this guy Athanasius, he's like an African man, a bishop of some place in Africa. And so he wrote this letter, which is the oldest document that contains all 27 books of the New Testament canon listed there. But that wasn't established yet. I guess, okay, the Council of Carthage, I guess, that established the New Testament canon. I didn't know that. I don't know all the names of all the councils and stuff. But anyway, or Jerome translates the Latin Vulgate. Now this is the thing that's important to remember here. Uh, at this point now, it's going over to the split in the church. Okay, I mean, it was Constantine who did it, so that would have been a little bit earlier, around this period when Lucian made the New Testament, the Greek New Testament. Around that time, Constantine splits the empire. There's the Eastern Roman Empire and a Western Roman Empire. Okay? And as time goes on, you see here, Jerome translates the Bible into Latin. This Vulgate becomes standard of the medieval church because in the Western Roman church, they started speaking Latin. Because previous to that, Greek was the kind of language of the official language of educated people and those things. But by the time you get to that period, Latin had taken over all that stuff in the West. But the Eastern Church, they still use Greek. And if it's that's the reason why they kind of preserve the Greek text Okay, so that most of the Greek texts were in that Eastern church, and then the Western church they use Latin text. They use this Latin Vulgate. Okay, and so that's why the Greek New Testament is mostly they'll call it they'll say it's from they'll sometimes they'll say it's the Byzantine texts. And the reason they say that is because that Eastern Roman Empire later it became known as Byzantium or the Byzantine Empire, okay? So so they call those texts the Byzantine texts, the Greek texts that were preserved in the Eastern Church, and the Western Church that had the Latin Bible. Okay, then but as time goes on, they're just preserving these scrolls, right? They have the scrolls of the Bible, but then as when a scroll gets too old and it's not useful anymore, then they have to copy it out onto another scroll, and then that will be their scroll. So we no longer have the original writings anymore. Those are long gone, right? All we have now are copies of copies of copies. And and in the West, they don't even have the Greek anymore. They just have the Latin. So it's only in the Eastern Church that they have the Greek text still, okay? And there's some other Bibles, like there's a Syrian one, like from that part of the world. There's a Syrian one. There's a few other ones, like a Coptic in Ethiopia, and those things. But mostly it's Greek and Latin. Um, so then later on, yeah. So then later on, Wycliffe makes a Bible in English, and then this guy revised it. Gutenberg comes out with the Latin Bible. Erasmus is Greek New Testament. Because this is the other thing is that there's all these different translate different scrolls in the Eastern Church, right? So then these things are like let's say if you're in some place like I don't know Constantinople, and then and then your scroll runs out, you make a new copy, and then another guy in another city, like whatever Antioch, he's gonna make another copy. He's gonna make a copy, but then each time they make a copy, there's little mistakes. They're very now these Bible copiers were very good compared to other ancient texts. These things were copied meticulously. It's it's far better than anything else we see in ancient literature. Far better, like leaps and bounds better. The copying, the level, the accuracy is next to none. There's no one who can copy it that well. But there are still uh, like mistakes. There are still little mistakes. So you see, so what they have is what they call a textual variant. So this one in Antioch, the guy maybe made a slight change. He didn't even realize it, maybe, or maybe he did. Maybe he thought, oh, this was a mistake from previous, so let me fix it. So those kind of things happen, okay? And but the guy in Constantinople, he didn't do that. He just had it. He just copied it perfectly. So then you have a textual variant, okay? But us looking at it today, we don't know which one is right because we just all we know is that this one says this and this one says this. We don't know which one is right, okay? So that's the science, or trying to figure out which one is right, which is the correct reading, as they say. That's called text criticism. It's a kind of it's a discipline in academia, in biblical studies. You know, they sometimes it's called a science, but it's more of an art than a science. Okay, because there's no scientific way to test any theory that they have about it. If they think, oh, the Constantinople guy was right, there's no way to test that theory, right? And then if another guy says, no, the one from Antioch was right, and then there's no way to test that either. It's just like they're just saying that, you know. Now they bring evidence, like the guy from Constantinople, he'll say, well, this one is right because I don't know, this is older, you know, and the guy from Antioch, he'll say, no, Older doesn't mean it's better. This one is better because look at the internal. They might look at the internal evidence, what they call internal evidence, right? Now they're looking at in the text. Okay, which one makes more sense? Does this one make more sense, or does Constantinople make more sense? And so they might go based on that kind of evidence. Or they might go based on what's called external evidence. So they might say, so the guy in Constantinople might say, no, well, this thing happened here. There was this battle here on this date, and the whole library. Before the battle, they moved the whole library to another place. At that time, that's when they copied it out, and so this is I don't know, like I don't know. They have things like that. They introduce evidence from history or things like that. Other things external to the text itself. Okay, that's external evidence. It's not usually like that kind of thing, historical stuff. It's other stuff. But anyway, I'm not really too sure about all this stuff. But um, so then yeah, William Tyndale translate the New Testament from Greek. Tyndale strangled and burns, Coverdale. So there's all these Bibles coming. Then finally, Geneva Bible, Bishop's Bible, Reims, and then King James. Okay. So now, when the King James was made, what they did was they looked at all these texts. They looked at the Bishop's Bible, the Geneva Bible, the Tyndale Bible. They looked at all of them. And they also used Erasmus's Greek text, and they used other texts too. They didn't always. People always say they used this one for the KJV, and it's true they did, but they also used other texts too in Greek. But anyway, the point is, back then they had a philosophy. It wasn't. It was a different philosophy of the Bible and how it comes down to us. Okay, for them, they saw this Greek Bible by Erasmus, the Tyndale Bible, the Coverdale Bible, the Great Bible, all these Bibles. They thought of them all as the Word of God, revealed by God to the people. Okay, through God's providence, He was the one who was preserving the Bible all through the centuries in the Eastern Church, and then now he's the one who allows these people to come and get it and translate it. And even the King James people, they're saying that God is guiding them. They prayed on that. They believed that. Okay, and their goal was to take all these good Bibles and make one Bible that was that what they said was not justly to be accepted against. Not justly to be accepted against. So no just person would accept against it. That is, make or look at it and say that this is wrong or that's wrong. Okay, that's what they're saying. Not justly to be accepted against. They're saying that they could take all these good Bibles and make one that's truly good or almost or perfect, basically. Okay, not to be accepted against. Okay. Now, after them, you have this other view of the Bible, okay? Which is this idea that no, these ones they all have mistakes. All these ones we have today, they have mistakes. And so, therefore, even the King James translators, they are just working with a bunch of different scrolls that have mistakes, so they don't know what's a mistake and what isn't. So when they finally make their Bible, it's full of mistakes too. That was the philosophy of later centuries. Like in the 19th century, people started talking like this. Okay, there were these two guys, Westcott and Hort. Westcott and Hort. They were the big ones that were pushing this idea that now all these new Bibles are mistaken, and the only true perfect Bible from God is the originals, the original writings in Greek and Hebrew whoever, like, Isaiah, when he wrote it, that was the only time they had a perfect Isaiah. And after that, as every time this copier came and copied this scroll, there was a mistake. So there's no more perfect Isaiah. And that's the same for every book of the Bible. There is no perfect copy in existence. And the only way for us to even come close to the perfect one is for us to try to go back and try to, using our human reason, to try to reestablish or kind of, what do they say? Like, what do they say? Reconstruct the original words of it. Just totally just using our reason, based on those evidences I was telling you, either the internal evidence. Okay, what does which variant makes more sense here in the text? Internal evidence or external evidence from outside of the text? Okay, so that was what they call text criticism. That's what they used to say. And so those guys, Westcott and Hort, they found, like, well, okay, I was telling you about how the scrolls keep getting copied and copied, right? And then eventually they went from scrolls to books. So but the books are being copied. Older books are getting, they're too old. They get thrown out, and and they copy and copy and copy. So the ones we have now, they're not that old anymore, right? The oldest ones we have today, of those Greek ones from the Eastern Empire, they're like from the 13th or 12th or 13th century, the oldest ones. Okay, or maybe there's some that are a little bit older or whatever, but it's around the Middle Ages. Okay, and then beyond that, we don't have, at that time when Westcott and Hort came out, they didn't have any older ones. But at that time, that was when Westcott and Hort came. That was like the 19th century. People were doing archaeology and science, and those kind of studies of history were advancing rapidly. And so they found some very old manuscripts of the Bible. Some were very old. So they found one, for example, in the Vatican called, and they now call it Codex Vaticanus. Codex is like a name for an old kind of book. The original books were codexes before they had books. And so Codex Vaticanus was found, and they date that from like the third or fourth century. I'm not sure. And there was one called Codex Sinaiticus, which is found in this monastery at the base of Mount Sinai. And so that one is also, I think, from the fourth or fifth century or sometime around that. And they also started to find other things like these ancient papyri, they call them. They're pieces of papyrus, which is like a paper that they make from reeds that grow in the riverbed of the Nile. And they're mostly from Egypt. Well, not necessarily from the Nile, but they're made from reeds. They beat the reeds into pulp, and then they dry the pulp. It makes kind of paper thing, and then they write on it, right? Papyrus. So they found some pieces of papyrus that were very old. They seem to be from the first or second century. So those ones are the very oldest, like, manuscript type of evidence that we have of the Bible. Very, very old. And those are all New Testament stuff, you know. And then this century, or middle of last century, they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. So those are not really New Testament writings; they're all Old Testament. But they offered a kind of this, so they give you this more of textual variation between the Old Testament stuff, because the previous to that, mostly what we had of the Old Testament was this thing called the Masoretic text, which is from, oh God, this is so boring. I hope I'm not just boring you guys. Anyway, the point is, they had this Hebrew Bible, but now when the Dead Sea Scrolls came, now they had this thing to compare it with, which is very old. And so they were, and because the Masoretic is from like, yeah, the Middle Ages or something. So then comparing them, they found differences. But the Dead Sea Scrolls are from another group too. They're not like quite the same as regular Jews. They're sort of like they kept themselves apart from all the other Jews, and they had this other different weird practices and stuff. So they're a little bit different, but they did have their Bible is it confirms a lot of what we read in the Bible because it's very old, but it's still pretty much the same as our Old Testament. But there are differences, and so those are kind of also looked on as another thing to compare. And so now when people come up with modern translations now, what they're doing usually is they're saying these newer or sorry, these older texts that we found more recently than the King James, like such as the Vaticanus thing I was saying before, or Sinaiticus, or those papyrus, right? Those things are older than the King James, than the text that the King James used. Those Greek texts, which are the oldest ones we have are from the Middle Ages, right? So they say these ones are much older, so they're probably better. That is, they're probably closer to the original writings. And then these later texts that we have from the Middle Ages, they're the ones that were changed over time. People writing, they're making mistakes, so then they get changes, and that's why it's like this now. That's why the Bible's like this now. But originally, those are probably better. So whatever writing they have, those are better. That's what they do. Now, in text criticism, that is not a legitimate argument, okay? Because the mere fact that a text is older does not mean it's better. If you're comparing, let's say you're comparing Plato's Republic, you have different manuscripts. The same kind of thing happened with Plato's Republic as with the Bible. They would have scrolls or books, but over time they would wear out and they would have to copy it by hand. Okay? And so all those ancient texts are like that. But the Bible, in terms of the quality of that copying and other things like they're just the copy, just the quality of the texts, the number of texts that they have, the Bible is far, far, far more well preserved and more texts and like more better copying, fewer mistakes, right? It's like way, 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 way more advanced than any other ancient text by far. Okay, so that has to be said first off. But what I was saying though is if you take Plato's Republic and you have two texts and one is older and the other one's newer, and you're trying to say, okay, which one's right? They have a textual variance, right? There's a variation there. The mere fact that this one is older doesn't mean it's better. There could be anything that happened because the thing is, even the older one is still thousands of or hundreds of years old, or maybe thousands, right? And even and the newer one, or not thousands, but they're very old texts, right? And the newer one, yeah, it's newer, but not that much newer. And also, we don't know what happened in between. We don't know anything about it. Because so this newer one might be from like Germany, and this other older one, we found it in Italy. Okay, and so you might look at them and say, well, the Italy one is older, so maybe that one's better. And then you might say, oh no no wait, this German one, this one we found in Germany, it's newer, it's not as old. But it seems like the Germans, when they caught Plato's Republic, they put it straight in the library and they didn't touch it. But we can see based on the writings of whatever bishop was taking care of it, the bishop in here in Italy, when he was taking care of Plato's Republic, they used to be very much, making copy, like, I don't know, they had a different philosophy or something. So that might be your argument as to why this one's better, the newer one. So there could be many, many reasons like that. Why a text which is not as old is still superior in text criticism. And so they would take that reading. That's a better reading than this older one, you know? So the mere fact that a text is older doesn't mean that it's a better reading. Okay? But in the text criticism of the Bible, they almost always just say, "Oh, all those older ones from the third century, the papyrus, the Codex Vaticanus, and those ones, that they almost always take them as being better, and they hold the Greek as very low quality because it's so much newer. Those texts are so much newer, right? But that's no reason to do that. And the fact is, when it comes to the number of texts, the number of witnesses supporting any given reading, right? The Greek texts, those Byzantine texts, they far outnumber, far outnumber any of any of these other readings, you know, because those things that they found later, like the other older ones, there's very few of those. They're comparatively very few of those older ones. But just the fact that these ones, the Byzantine texts, they're from, you know, the Middle Ages, so people say, oh well, they're newer, so they're probably changed more. But that's not a reason to say that. Now, let me show you this website because there's a website where that I really like that that has a lot of good defenses for these things. Because this website used to be much better, but somehow they lost their domain or something, and then they had to change it. So if you go to KJV today, sometimes it's a bit hard to find the things. But if you look in here, if you go search and you just search different things, it'll show you a lot of them. Okay, but anyway, I searched this one: Easter or Passover in Acts 12:4. So in Acts 12:4, they have this thing about Easter. They say Easter in the King James, but the word in Greek is Pascha. So they say, oh, it shouldn't be Easter; it should be Passover. The word is Pascha means Passover. Okay, but the argument here that these people say is that no, actually, they used Easter because the disciples would celebrate something they call the Lord's Passover on the Sunday. They wouldn't do Passover the way the Jews did anymore. They did something called the Lord's Passover, which later became Easter. So the King James wanted to differentiate this word Pascha from Passover, so they put Easter. That's the argument here, okay? And this website has a lot of text critical information and stuff. So for example, it has a lot of stuff on Revelations. So there's different articles, you know. You can search a book. That's the best way to probably do it if you come to this website. Search the book name. And then you can see the different books, the different articles on that book. Okay? So you can see in Revelation 15:3, there's a dispute. Some the King James says saints, other Bibles say nations or ages. Okay? And so you just click here, read more, and then you can see more of this stuff. But all I'm saying to you is this thing defends the text criticism of it, this website, and it's very strong. Like the King James is completely defensible. There's other websites too I can show you, but it gets very complicated. This is one of the easier ones to read. But all I'm saying is that the King James is completely defensible from the perspective of these text critics. Okay, they just don't. Most text critics don't agree with this kind of way of thinking about it because they don't have any interest in defending the King James. They never were taught that there's any reason to defend the King James, and so they don't feel the need to, and they just think of the King James as much newer and just inferior. Okay. But like I was telling you, older is not better, and there's many good reasons to believe the King James is much superior. Also, we should just know that God is going to preserve his word. Okay? Let me show you that. Well, anyway, it's Proverbs 12, 6 to 7. I'll get it out in the computer. Oh, okay, here it is. Finally. It's Proverbs 12. Oh, it's not 12, 6 to 7. Uh is this Psalm 12? What? I swear I was just looking at this. Oh yeah, Psalm 12, 6 to 7. The words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. Thou shalt keep them, O Lord, thou shalt preserve them from this generation forever. So the Lord is going to keep his words and preserve them from this generation forever. So that's why we should believe that God would protect the King James as it or the Bible as it was being preserved in the church, through the Greeks. The Greek church was keeping the Greek texts, and God was guiding it the whole time. And then when it comes up to even those things like the canon and all those decisions that were made at councils, the canon, the 66 books that we have that we include in the Bible, when those councils met to decide which books would stay and which books would be removed from the canon, right? That was, again, God decided who would sit on those councils, and he decided what he is the one who was in control of that, not the people. Okay, they went and voted because God decided. God, knowing who would vote for what, he decided who would sit on the council. Okay, and the same thing in our argument is what happens with the translation. The same exact thing, and he controlled it so that the King James would be the perfect translation. Hang on one sec. Um, yeah, so I don't know what I was talking about now. I forget now. But anyway, the Lord preserves the word. Okay, he preserves it. And what you can see is here, what he says here is pure words, as silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. Now that to me, that's how it gets refined, It starts off as the Old Testament. Then it comes down. Then he makes a Greek New Testament in Greek, but it's all different books, right? And then as time goes on, then it gets put into a canon. Then as time goes on, they put verses and chapter numbers and everything, divide all those things. All this to me is the purifying of it, the refining of it. A silver tried in a furnace 7 times. So it's getting refined and getting better and getting better. Then they translate it. That to me, the translation is also part of that. And then even the translation gets improved. Remember, I was saying they had different English Bibles? Then the KJV translators take all those and make the King James. But even the King James, they made it in 1611, I think. Then that one gets changed. Now we have a 1769 edition. In 1769, they changed it. They didn't change much. They just changed, mostly it's just spelling and things like that. Because in the days of the King James, they had a different spelling for many words. So yeah, so that's the process of how God preserves His word. Okay, I don't know if this video is too boring and long, then just tell me and I'll try to do a better one. But anyway, I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. Now, that's a good website. You can check this KJV today. Okay, you can look up stuff, look up different things about different different like Bible verses and so forth, you know? I want to show you this thing. Deism versus theism. Because you see, when Westcott and Hort came out, when they had that, those two came out and started saying that no, those old Bibles, they don't work. We have to have a new Bible based on these new things that we found, right? That was when this kind of new kind of thinking called deism came about. Deism versus theism. Theism is the way Christianity was understood previously, and they still do consider themselves, most Christians do consider themselves theists, but they've taken on a lot of these deist views, you know? So theism is the belief in the existence of a god or God, specifically of a creator who intervenes in the universe. Now, mostly when we say theism nowadays, we're talking about the one God thing, the monotheism. So it's mostly referring to nowadays that we use this word to refer to Christians, Jews, and Muslims. Okay, but it's the one God idea, and then people who believe in many gods, they call them polytheists. Okay, because it's a different kind of. I mean, when we're talking about the way you see the universe and the way things are, there's a different way of seeing it. If there's many gods, then there's a different way of understanding truth and morality and stuff, you know? There's no one ruling God to say this is what's right. So it's a different thing, you know? If you have, there's no one, so in polytheism, or what they used to call paganism, there's no one right or wrong. There's no one truth. Because no one can know what is the truth. Only God can know. So if there's one God over everything, then yeah, he knows the truth, so there is a truth. If there's no one God over everything, then truth is subjective. We don't know exactly, there's no objective standard of truth. Okay? So anyway, that's theism. Deism is the belief that there is a supreme being, but he does not intervene in the universe. He just doesn't touch it. And so in this view, there can kind of be a universal truth as well. Like there's one God, right? So he knows everything. So he knows the truth of everything. So whatever, if there is one truth, then he knows it. So you can have the one truth. But the problem is with this way of seeing it, the God doesn't intervene in the universe. He doesn't do miracles. He doesn't create everything. He doesn't create humans just out of nothing, out of the dirt, you know? And that's not part of that way of seeing God. Okay? And now that view of God became more popular in the 19th century when those guys were coming out with those older texts, okay? And so in this one, God doesn't intervene in human affairs. In theism, he does. So in theism, the theistic God, he would intervene in human affairs to give us a Bible with 66 books exactly and get rid of those other ones. And he would intervene in the translation as well. He would make sure that it gets translated properly and that his word is preserved. Okay? In deism, he does not intervene in human affairs. So that's why that philosophy, the philosophy that we have to trace back the Bible to the original, comes from that idea. Because they're like, oh well, the Bible was made originally from God. He just told humans to write it, how to do it. But then since then, it's just whatever happens to it happens because God doesn't intervene in human affairs. So whatever happens to it is happening, and some people take it this way, some people make changes, and so that's why they feel the need to try to reconstruct the original. Okay, but the theist, knowing that God intervenes in human affairs, we can just rest easy and know that God will preserve the word of the Bible, and He'll give us a perfect Bible. Okay. The deist does not accept miracles or supernatural revelations. Deist accepts them. So yeah, we can accept that God miraculously controlled the Bible and allowed it to be perfect. Deism often practiced by anyway. This is just weird. This last point they made that doesn't even make any sense. Okay, but this is important. This is actually these should be reversed. Actually, this last point. Deism is often practiced by religious people, and deism, you'll see people who are very religious in deism and people who have practically atheists or they have no religious views at all or no religious practices at all. They are often deists as well because they think God doesn't, there might be a God or maybe not. If he is out there, he doesn't really care about us. He doesn't intervene in human affairs, right? That's their view. Okay? But our view is that he does intervene in human affairs. And so this is the important argument in my view. You won't hear people talk about this. This idea that we can reconstruct the original of the Bible using human reason, right? That is a deistic understanding of the Bible. It's not a theistic. We are theists. Christians are theists. Okay, we are not deists. And so that way of understanding the Bible as perfect in the original and then humans intervened and there and God doesn't intervene in human affairs, so then the Bible just happened to become whatever it is today, and now we have to reconstruct the original. That is a deist view. In our view, God is intervening in human affairs, so of course he would intervene in the human affairs around his word. And that's why we can trust that he would give us a perfect Bible in the King James. I hope that wasn't too long and boring, but I don't know. I don't know if that made any sense to you guys or what, but anyway. Let's read a little bit about this. Deism is a religious belief holding that that God created the universe, established. See, this is the other thing about it. And established rationally comprehensible moral and natural laws, but does not intervene in human affairs through miracles or supernatural revelation. So, rationally comprehensible moral and natural laws. So this is part of the problem with deism, why it's not like theism, and why we shouldn't adopt these views. They think that they can rationally comprehend morality and natural laws, all the natural laws, all nature, right? So that's why they think they can like just first of all, forget about the moral, but just the natural laws, right? That's why they think that they can reconstruct the original thing of the Bible because they think they can understand the natural laws. It's all rationally comprehensible. And then once we understand them, we can kind of reverse engineer everything that happens. You know? It's the same kind of logic that you see in evolution and stuff like that. Those kind of understandings of science, you know? When people they think that they can rationally comprehend all the natural laws of the universe so that they can so that we know what the universe is now, we know the state of it now, and if we know all the natural laws, then we can just reconstruct or reverse engineer the universe back to the beginning. Okay, so that's the logic of evolutionism and Big Bangism and all those things, right? Now, and also even moral laws, they think they can figure out morality with using human reason instead of just getting it revealed to us by God. Okay, so that's the same thing with evolution. They use that rationally comprehensible moral or natural laws, and then in the Bible too, it's the same thing. They're saying that they can rationally comprehend how it came down to us through the history of studying the history of those manuscripts, and that they can somehow, using those studies, they can debate and discuss and figure out all the exact correct readings of the Bible, and then they could reconstruct the original words of it, and then they would have the original perfect Bible again. Okay, but if you read, I mean, and I'm gonna put my paper in the description. You can look at my paper on this stuff, but they admit, most text critics, if they're honest, they'll admit that that's a fool's errand. They'll never reconstruct the original. The debates just carry on and on. Any given reading, any given textual variance, right? Some people will say, "Oh, this is the correct one." Other people say, "This is the correct one." Sometimes they have 5 different readings in different manuscripts, and some will say that one, some will say that one, some will say that one. So it's just endless debates. You can never prove, and like I said before, you can never test any theory. So you can never prove any of these theories. So it's just theory after theory with no proof for any of them. So it's just endless debating. They will never reconstruct the Bible. Okay? So in that view, there is no more perfect Bible. That Bible is the perfect Bible that God created when he told the writers to write. That's no longer there. But as we know from the Bible, it says that God preserved his word, right? Psalm 12. So we know that he would preserve his word. So we don't have to worry about that. And people will say, well, you only know that because of the Bible. The Bible, what if it wasn't preserved? Well, again, we believe in God, and we believe in God who preserves things. If he could raise Jesus from the dead, don't you think he could make sure the Bible gets saved? If we believe that Jesus rose from the dead, we should believe that God would protect the Bible and preserve it. Now, I don't know. Was there anything else I wanted to talk to you about this thing? I don't know. I hope that wasn't just completely boring and dumb. Like I hope you guys got something out of that. But if that just made you have more questions, or if you don't understand, or if there's something I didn't explain very well, just put the questions in the comment section, and I'll try to help you out. I hope that helped a little bit. I will put some links in the description of this video to help you look up things about this subject if you would like to learn more. Okay. All right. And thank you for watching Toronto Bible Study. Hallelujah.